The machine gave me the result at 2:17 hours, station time. I remember the exact hour because I had just finished refilling the calibration solution in Bay 3, and the overhead strip in that bay had been flickering for 6 weeks in a way that made every task feel slightly wrong, like reading a letter in someone else's handwriting. I had submitted the maintenance request twice. The light still flickered. You learn to work around things out here. That is most of what the job is. The delegation had come in at 2300. 12 members of the Vethori Diplomatic Corps, here for the mandatory Galactic Health Summit compliance scan, the biennial check that every signatory species submitted to, no exceptions, a bureaucratic ritual I had processed hundreds of times across 3 postings and 4 years of service. You collected the samples. You ran them through the array. You logged the results. Most of the time, the results were green across the board: baseline compatibility markers, pathogen exposure index, metabolic equilibrium. The kind of data that ended up in a report nobody read until a treaty negotiation needed a footnote. I'd been doing station work for about 4 years, after 2 years of field medicine that I still thought about more fondly than was probably useful. Field work was honest in a way station work rarely was. You knew what was wrong, you fixed it, or you didn't, you moved on. Station work was careful, systematic, correct. Important, I supposed. But the honesty of it was different. The honesty of it was administrative. The Vethori were the 3rd delegation I had processed that week. Before them, a Solvan trade contingent, pleasant enough, though their atmospheric requirements meant I wore a respirator through the entire scan, and a Drelathi security detail who didn't speak to me once but left a small carved token on the counter when they left, which I later learned was a Drelathi thank you for not flinching at their appearance. I kept it on my desk. I still have it somewhere. I processed 11 of the 12 Vethori without incident. Outpost Sarath was not a prestigious posting. It was a mid-rim compliance way station, the kind of place that mattered in the way pipes matter, invisibly and completely, and that nobody thought about unless something broke. We had a staff of 42, station crew, technical staff, 2 physicians, a handful of us biotechs, a kitchen rotation, a maintenance crew who had my undying respect for keeping the life support running on a budget that suggested the Galactic Health Accord's coordinating office had the same attitude toward infrastructure as it had toward the Bay 3 lighting request. The delegations came and went on a rotating calendar. We ran their scans. We filed their reports. We sent the data upward into the administrative machinery of the Accords and received back, periodically, acknowledgement receipts and the occasional procedural update. It was honest work. It was important in the way that most of the most important work is important, unglamorous, systematic, and nearly invisible. I had come to station work late. My first 2 years out of medical training had been field postings, a refugee resettlement camp in the Kren system, and then an 8-month tour with a mobile medical unit following the Tethric border conflicts. Field medicine was brutal and necessary, and the most alive I had ever felt doing a job, which is not something you can explain to people who haven't done it. You were close to the problem. The problem was immediate and real, and your tools were limited, and you made decisions quickly, and you lived or failed by your judgment. Station work was different. Station work was careful and documented and correct. I had made my peace with it, most days. The Vethori were, as a species, formal in the way of people for whom formality is not a performance but a structure they genuinely find useful. Each of the 11 moved through the intake process with the same efficient courtesy, arm extended, questions minimal, a kind of focused cooperation that made the scans go quickly. 2 of them had mild pathogen flags that I noted for the routine follow-up, nothing significant. One had an atmospheric adaptation index slightly outside standard parameters, which was within normal range for Vethori who spent extended time on non-Vethori stations. Standard stuff. I logged it all and moved on. The 12th was the Empress. I did not know she was the Empress when the door opened. The diplomatic manifest listed the 12 members by function code, attaché, cultural liaison, security senior, and so on, and the 12th entry read simply principal. In my experience, principal meant the senior diplomat, usually someone who had been doing this for 40 years and had the patience of furniture. I had set out the standard intake tray and was entering the previous sample's confirmation code when she came in. She was not what I expected from a 40-year diplomat. She was younger than her title implied, though I would learn later that age maps differently across Vethori generations, and that she was, in fact, older than she looked by a significant margin. What I registered first was the stillness. Not the stillness of a person who is relaxed, but the stillness of a person who has learned, over a long time, to take up exactly as much space as they intend to and no more. She wore a traveling robe of deep charcoal with a pale champagne gold lining that matched her skin, that warm, faintly luminous gold that is characteristic of Vethori upper court lineage, or so I had read in the species orientation materials during my first posting. Her hair was the color of dark wine, pulled back simply, a few strands loose. Her eyes, when she looked at me, were the pale silver gray of winter sky just before it clears. She looked at me the way people look at a door they're about to walk through, not unkindly, not with particular interest, simply assessing. "This is the Biware station," I said, because I always stated the obvious to new patients. It set them at ease. It made the space legible. "I'm Dast Oren Dast Biotech Station Staff. I'll be running your compliance scan. It takes about 12 minutes, if you'd like to sit." "I know what a compliance scan is," she said. Her galactic standard was perfect. No accent, or rather an accent so precisely controlled it had become its own neutral thing. The way a musician sounds when they've mastered so many styles that their playing becomes simply precise. "Of course," I said, "please sit when you're ready." She sat. She extended her arm for the sample draw without being asked. She watched the array while I ran the preliminary sequencing, not with anxiety but with the focused attention of someone who finds machines interesting. The way some people watch weather, not because they're worried but because they like knowing what's coming. The array took 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I read the result once. Then I read it again. The bio-compatibility array at Outpost Sarath was a Praxis 7 unit, 11 years old but well-maintained, recalibrated every 6 months, and accurate to within 0.3% across all registered species compatibility markers. It was not a piece of equipment that made mistakes. It was also not a piece of equipment designed to produce the result I was looking at. The compatibility index is a composite score. It measures dozens of interlocking biological factors: atmospheric tolerance range, baseline metabolic resonance, immune system interaction likelihood, neurochemical frequency alignment, and about 40 other markers that the Galactic Health Accords had standardized across all signatory species. For most cross-species pairs, the index returns something in the low to mid-range, and the report notes the biological distance as informational data. For some pairs, the index returns high, meaning the two biological systems are unusually well matched, compatible in ways that go beyond simple coexistence. It's rare. It's not unheard of, even across significant species lines. A high result between a human and a Vethori was something I had never seen in 4 years of practice. A 94.7% compatibility index was something I had never seen at all. I looked at the number on the screen. I looked at her. She was watching the array with the same calm attention she'd had from the beginning, her hands folded in her lap, apparently unaware that the machine had just told me something neither of us had any framework for. I ran it again. "Is something wrong with the equipment?" she asked. "I'm just verifying the sequence," I said, which was true. The second run took 12 minutes. I watched every step of it. I did not look at her while it ran. I looked at the sample, at the sequencing window, at the calibration log, at every single input variable I could check, and every single one was correct. The sample was clean. The machine was clean. The calibration was current. The second result was 94.9%. I stood there for a moment with both results on the screen. "Dast," she said. Not a question. Just my name, the way she'd heard me give it, spoken quietly to get my attention because I had apparently been standing very still for longer than was professional. I turned around. "The scan is complete," I said. "I'm going to need to run a confirmatory sequence. That's routine for any result outside standard parameters." It was not always routine, but it was not a lie either. "Are you able to wait another 15 minutes or should I schedule a return appointment?" She looked at me steadily. What did it find? I had run thousands of compliance scans. The result was the patient's data. They had a right to it. That wasn't in question. What was in question was how to explain a 94.7% cross-species compatibility index to a person who was, as I was beginning to suspect from the deference the other 11 Vethori had shown her all evening, rather more than a senior diplomat. "The scan returned an unusually high compatibility index," I said. "Between your biological profile and mine. I want to verify it before logging it, because a result in this range between a Vethori and a human is outside any precedent I'm aware of, and I want to be certain the reading is accurate before it becomes part of the official record." She was quiet for a long moment. "How high?" she said. 94.7% on the first run, 94.9 on the second. Another silence. Outside the bay, I could hear the faint hum of the station's atmospheric processing. The flickering light in Bay 3 was, for once, steady. "Run the confirmatory sequence," she said. I did. The third result was 94.8%. I saved all 3 results to the local buffer and did not yet log them to the main compliance record. That was a judgment call I would spend a long time examining afterward, whether it was the right one, whether it changed anything, whether it mattered. What I told myself at the time was that I wanted to speak to the station medical officer before logging a result with that kind of political weight. What was actually true was that I was a human medic at a mid-rim outpost at 300 in the morning, holding 3 confirmations of something the Galactic Health Accords had no protocol for, and I needed approximately 5 minutes to think. I did not get 5 minutes. The door opened at 3:09. The attaché's name, as I learned when he identified himself, was Dovin Karath. He was a Vethori male of middle years, impeccably dressed even at this hour, which told me he had not been asleep. He introduced himself with a title I didn't catch and looked at me with the expression of a person who has prepared extensively for a conversation he finds distasteful. "I understand the compliance scan returned an anomalous result," he said. I looked at the empress. She was still seated. Her expression had not changed since the third result. "The scan returned a high compatibility index," I said. I was about to consult with the station medical officer before logging. "That won't be necessary," Karath said. He said it pleasantly, the way a person says things they have decided are already done. "The result will be voided as a calibration error, and the scan will be re-administered through the delegation's own medical staff when we return to Vethori space." "The calibration is current," I said. "The machine was recalibrated 11 weeks ago. I checked all inputs on the confirmatory runs. There's no calibration error." "Nonetheless," he said. I looked at him. He looked at me. He was very sure of himself in the way that people are when they believe the situation is already settled, and they're simply waiting for the other party to understand that. "Void authorization for a logged compliance result requires signature from the patient," I said. I said it carefully, because it was a fact and not an argument. "I haven't logged the result yet, so there's nothing to void at this moment. When I do log it, the patient would need to authorize any amendment." Karath's expression shifted slightly. Not dramatically, he was too practiced for drama, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. She will authorize it, he said. I looked at the empress. She was looking at me. Attaché Kareth, she said without looking at him, you may wait outside. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room in which two people have established, without raising their voices, exactly who is in charge. Kareth held for a moment, then inclined his head and left. The door closed. She looked at the screen with the 3 results still on it. You checked the calibration yourself, she said. 3 times. And you're certain. As certain as I can be with the equipment available here. If you want an independent verification, the nearest Praxis 9 array is at Waystation Korath, about 6 hours transit. The 9 series is more precise. It would give you a 4th result under different conditions. She nodded slowly, not in agreement with anything in particular, more the way someone nods when they're processing something at a level below the conversation. What does it mean, she said, biologically, not politically, biologically. I sat down on the technician's stool because standing felt wrong for this conversation. It means the 2 biological systems are unusually well suited to coexist. Long-term metabolic resonance, your system and mine wouldn't be working against each other the way most cross-species pairs do, constantly compensating. Neurochemical frequency alignment, which sounds abstract but basically means the way each system processes sensory and emotional input is compatible, rather than dissonant. Most cross-species pairs experience a kind of low-grade friction there. Over time, immune interaction likelihood is in the cooperative range rather than the competitive range. I paused. The Accord uses compatibility index as a health and safety metric. It wasn't designed to mean anything social or political. It measures biology. But it's used as a basis for imperial match criteria, she said. I know. I looked it up while the 3rd run was processing. She almost smiled at that. It was a small thing, a slight shift at the corner of her mouth, and it was the first time her stillness had cracked even slightly. The Vethori Compact Accord, she said, requires that any confirmed imperial compatibility result above 90% be officially logged and entered into the imperial match registry. It also specifies that the compatible party, if non-Vethori, is ineligible for registry entry, and the result is to be voided. She said it without inflection, the way you recite something you've known so long it has lost all its texture. The law is 400 years old. It was written when the Vethori seat was trying to prevent exactly 2 foreign dynasties from absorbing the imperial line through strategic marriage. It has never been used to address a result like this, because a result like this has never existed. I see, I said. Do you understand what Attaché Kareth is asking you to do? He's asking me to void a legitimate medical finding. Yes. I won't do that, I said. The words came out quietly, without drama, because that was how I meant them. I was not making a declaration. I was stating a position the same way I would state a calibration result. Here is what is true, here is what I will and won't do with it. She looked at me for a long time. You understand this creates significant complications, she said. I'm a human medic at a mid-rim compliance station. The political complications land on you, not on me. I'm aware of that. I folded my hands on the counter. But I can't log a record as erroneous when it isn't, and I can't void a patient's result without their authorization. Those aren't political positions. They're the job. Something in her eyes shifted. Not dramatically. It was the shift of a person encountering something they had not quite expected to encounter, recataloging it. Log the result, she said. Are you certain? Log the result, medic gasped. I turned to the terminal and logged all 3 runs to the official compliance record. Timestamp 341, Outpost Sarath, Station Biware Bay 1, Praxis 7 Unit, Patient Identifier Vethori Imperial Principal, Technician Identifier ODAST Station Staff. Result: 94.7%, 94.9%, 94.8%, 3 independent confirmatory runs. I heard the door open. Kareth was back, or had never fully left. I heard him make a sound, not a word, just the compressed consonant of a person confronting something they had been certain wouldn't happen. "It's logged," I said without turning around. There was a long silence. "Empress," Kareth said, and his voice had changed. The pleasantness was gone. There was something underneath it now, something tight and very controlled. "The accord." "I know the accord," she said. "The political consequence of an unvoided result in the imperial registry." "I know the consequences," she said. "Every noble house on the Vithori seat will." Attaché Kareth. Her voice was exactly as quiet as it had been all evening. It stopped him the way a physical wall stops movement, simply by being there. "The result is logged. We will discuss the accord and its implications when we return to Vethori space. Tonight, there is nothing more to discuss." He left. The door didn't quite close all the way behind him. I got up and closed it. She was still in the patient chair. She looked, for the first time since she had walked in, tired not physically, but the deeper kind, the kind that lives in the eyes when a person has been carrying something long enough that an additional weight, even an expected one, registers. "I can get you something," I said. "There's a small commissary on this level, Vethori safe provisions, if you haven't eaten since the transit." "I'm fine." "I'll put water on the counter," I said, and did it anyway, because she had been in my medical bay since 2300, and it was now past 300, and I had a job to do that had nothing to do with compatibility indices. She watched me do it with that same cataloging expression. She drank the water. We didn't speak again that night. When she stood to leave, I gave her a copy of the logged result on a standard patient data chip, her data, her right, and she took it without comment. At the door, she paused. "Dast," she said. "Ma'am, you'll run 3 more scans over the summit compliance window. The Accord protocol requires independent verification over multiple sessions when a result exceeds 90%. I'm aware I can schedule. My staff will not administer them. The protocol requires an independent technician." I understood what she was saying. "I'll be on shift," I said. She left. I sat in the bay for a while after she was gone, listening to the hum of the Praxis 7 cycling down and the flicker of the Bay 3 light, which had started up again as reliably as ever. I thought about calibration. I thought about the accord. I thought about the 3 confirmation runs and the number on the screen, and the way she had said log the result with a tone I couldn't entirely parse. Not as a woman claiming something, not as a politician making a strategic move, but as a person insisting that a true thing be written down. There was something, I thought, in the fact that she had not hesitated. She hadn't needed to think about it. When I told her the number and she understood what it meant, politically, procedurally, what Kareth was already moving toward in the corridor outside, she hadn't asked for time. She had said log the result with the same economy of motion she brought to everything else, as if the decision had been made before I asked the question. As if the question itself was simple, and the complexity was in what came after, and the what came after was her problem to manage, and she was prepared to manage it. I had been a medic for 9 years. I had run thousands of scans. The job was to read what was true and record it accurately. She had come back to make sure I understood that she knew the difference between those two things. The second scan was 2 days later. The summit compliance window ran 5 days, and the protocol for a high-index result required a minimum of 3 independent sessions with a minimum 12-hour gap between each. I had already logged session 1. Sessions 2 and 3 were on the calendar. What was not on the calendar, and what I had not anticipated, was that each session would be administered with the entire diplomatic delegation present in the observation corridor outside Bay 1, 11 Vethori officials, and 3 of Kareth's administrative staff. visible through the bay's narrow clerestory window, watching in a way that was technically not watching. She came in at 800, punctual alone except for a single security escort who waited outside the door. They always watch, I asked, because it seemed worth establishing. When they have concerns, she said. I ran the prep sequence. She extended her arm. We did not speak while the array worked. At minute 7, she said, you haven't asked. Asked what? Why I didn't authorize the void. I adjusted the sequencing window. It's not my place to ask. It's a reasonable question. It's your data, I said. You made a decision about your own medical record. I don't need to understand it. She was quiet for a moment. The array hummed. There have been 47 compatibility scans run on me, she said, in accordance with the Imperial Match Protocol over the last 22 years. The highest result among Vethori candidates was 61.3%. The process is considered a formality. It's expected to confirm a politically arranged match, not to produce one. The scan is supposed to find what the court has already decided. She paused. It has never, in 47 administrations, found a result above 62%. The court has been waiting, for 22 years, to find a result that would justify a match they have already chosen. I didn't say anything. They haven't found it, she said, because it wasn't there. Until now, I said. Until now. The array completed. The result was 94.6%. I logged it. I heard the sound from the corridor, not words, but a collective quality of attention that changed, the way air changes before weather. I did not look up. Session 2 logged, I said. One more required under protocol. I'll have scheduling send the appointment to your delegation's communications channel. Dast, she said. I looked at her. What is your given name? That surprised me. I wasn't certain why. Oren, I said. She nodded as if filing it. Thank you, Oren, she said and left. I sat with the result on the screen for a while. 94.6%. 3 sessions now, all in the same range, all flagged under the same protocol. The accord required them to be entered into the Imperial Match Registry pending review. The registry review process was, according to the supplementary documentation I had read twice overnight, managed by a committee of 12 Vethori noble houses, any one of which could invoke the non-Vethori exemption clause and have the entry struck. The odds that all 12 would invoke it were, I calculated, approximately certain. I thought about that. Then I thought about the fact that she had not voided a single one. The third scheduled session was day 4. Between session 2 and session 3, 3 things happened. The first was that a formal communication arrived at Outpost Sarath from the Vethori Imperial Secretariat, addressed to Station Commander Rithwick, noting that a compliance scan result had been logged under unusual parameters, and requesting that the station preserve all procedural records for potential audit. Commander Rithwick called me into his office and asked, carefully, if the equipment had malfunctioned. I told him it had not. He asked, more carefully, if I was certain. I told him I was. He looked at me for a long moment with the expression of a man who would very much prefer a different answer, and then said, "Fine," and dismissed me. The second thing was that Kareth requested to meet with me privately. I agreed to the meeting. He explained, without quite saying anything directly accusatory, that the result had created a procedural irregularity that was causing strain on the summit's diplomatic momentum, and that a cooperative technician might find a way to resolve the irregularity through a re-examination of the original sample handling. I told him the sample handling had been correct and documented. He said he understood. He left. Nothing in the conversation had been a threat exactly, but the shape of it was familiar. I had grown up in a town where the people who ran things spoke in that particular register, the register of implied consequences and plausible deniability. It was a language I knew how to listen to without being moved by it. The shape of what he was asking was clear. find a technical pretext, a contamination flag on the original sample, an equipment anomaly that hadn't shown up in the calibration log but could, if written carefully, be interpreted as having been present. The kind of small technical imprecision that was genuinely plausible, genuinely hard to disprove, and genuinely dishonest. I had seen it done before in other contexts, in other institutional disputes, where the truth was inconvenient and the technician was the most accessible lever. I understood why he was asking. I also understood that understanding why someone is asking you to do something wrong doesn't change whether it's wrong. The third thing was that I looked up Caliph Vorn. That was her name. I found it in the public diplomatic record, the Vethori Delegation Manifest filed with the Galactic Health Summit's coordinating office, which listed each delegation's principal representative by name and title. The name I had been entering into compliance records as Vethori Imperial Principal was Empress Caliph Vorn, 41st ruler of the Vethori seat, sovereign of the Compact, in power for 11 years following the death of her predecessor. I read the public record for about an hour. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. I told myself I was doing due diligence, understanding the political context of a result I had logged. What I was actually doing, if I'm honest, was trying to understand the person who had sat in my patient chair 3 times now and chosen, each time, not to make this easier. What the public record told me was not much, and also quite a lot. 11 years in power, unmarried formally. The 47 compatibility scans I now knew about had been public knowledge in Vethori political circles, a slow-motion story about a sovereign who could not find a biologically acceptable match, and a court that kept rerunning the protocol hoping the numbers would change. No children, by Vethori imperial succession tradition, without a confirmed match. A sovereign who had been in power for 11 years without an heir, without a match, in a court that needed both, and had spent decades trying to produce them through a process that kept returning the same answer. I read about the Vethori Compact Accord. I read about the non-Vethori exemption clause. I read, in a footnote of a diplomatic history piece, that the clause had been invoked 14 times in 400 years and had never been successfully challenged. Each time a result was entered in the registry, the clause was applied and the result was struck. Clean, procedural, final. The registry's record was of clean lines and closed cases. I put the record away and went to prepare Bay 1. I thought, not for the first time, about what kind of person spends 11 years sitting on a throne with a protocol that keeps returning a null result and keeps sitting there anyway, keeps submitting to the scans, keeps watching the court run the numbers, keeps watching the numbers come back wrong by the court's definition of right, and doesn't appoint an heir by some other method, doesn't rewrite the succession rules, doesn't walk away from the protocol, just keeps going through it because the protocol is real even when its result is inconvenient. A person who believed in the process, I thought, even when the process was failing her, or a person who was waiting for something specific that the process hadn't yet produced, or both. The two things were not mutually exclusive, and I had the sense, reading between the lines of 11 years of public record and 47 logged scans, that she was not the kind of person who waited without understanding exactly what she was waiting for. That told me something. I wasn't sure I could have said exactly what. She arrived for Session 3 at 800, the same as Session 2. This time there was no security escort. The corridor outside had twice as many observers as before. I could see them through the clearstory, and I recognized 2 of them as staff from Commander Rithwick's office. There was also, I noted, a new face, a young Drelathi official I hadn't seen before, carrying a note tablet and positioned at an angle that suggested she was documenting the session as an independent observer. Whether the Accord's coordinating body had sent her or the Secretariat had requested her, I didn't know. It didn't change anything about what I was going to do. I had laid out the Bay 1 intake tray the same way I laid it out every session, sample vials in order, calibration log open on the secondary terminal, primary array powered up and running its self-check. The self-check took 4 minutes. I had watched it run enough times to know its rhythm, and this morning I watched it again, carefully, not because I expected anything different, but because careful attention was the only thing I had to offer that mattered. She sat down, she extended her arm. "The Secretariat communication," I said, while I ran the prep. "I'm aware of it. They're asking for a procedural audit. They're hopping to find a technical disqualification," she said. "They won't." Kareth also spoke to me. "I know," a pause. "I apologize for that." "You don't need to." "I do, it shouldn't have happened." She said it with the same flat precision she used for everything, not dramatic, just accurate. I ran the array. We sat in the particular silence of the machine working, the hum of the sequencer, the soft click of the calibration check at minute 4. Outside, I was aware of the observers in the corridor. Inside, it was just the two of us and the Praxis 7 and the light in Bay 3, which was, for the third time in my memory, not flickering. At minute 9, she said, "What will you do after?" "After the compliance window closes, I'll submit the final session record and the summary report to the Galactic Health Accord's office. After that, it's out of my hands." "I mean in general," she said, "after your posting here." That surprised me again. "I don't know, my contract runs another 8 months. After that," I considered. "I'd like to go back to field medicine. I did 2 years of field posting early in my career. I liked it better than station work. More honest in a way, you know what you're dealing with." She almost smiled again, the same small thing at the corner of her mouth. "Honest work," she said. "That's the idea." The array completed, 94.7%. I logged it. 3 sessions, 3 results in the same range. The protocol was complete. I generated the summary report, total compatibility index averaged 94.72%, 3 independent sessions, no calibration anomaly, no procedural irregularity, result stands, and filed it with the Galactic Health Accord's office at 8:49. I gave her the session 3 data chip. She held all 3 now, her own record. She didn't leave immediately. She looked at the terminal, at the final result on the screen, with an expression I couldn't fully name, not quite grief, not quite resignation, not quite hope. Something that lived between all of them. The expression of a person who had been carrying a particular kind of loneliness for 22 years and had just been handed a piece of paper that said the loneliness was not biologically inevitable, and was not entirely certain what to do with that information. I wanted to say something that would be useful. I could not think of anything that wouldn't land wrong. Some things are true and nothing you add to them makes them more true. You just let them sit. The result on the screen was 94.7%. The average across 3 sessions was 94.72%. In 9 years of medicine, I had never seen a number like that. I had run compatibility scans as part of general intake work, as part of field triage assessments, as part of the Health Accord compliance process at 2 other stations before this one. I had seen high results, a few, over the years between species with known biological proximity. I had never seen anything in the 90s. I had not, before this week, believed such a result was clinically possible between a human and a Vethori. The machine had no reason to lie. The calibration was current. The inputs were documented and correct. The result was accurate. I thought about all the things that meant, and all the things it didn't mean, and the distance between those 2 categories, which was vast and had a name, and the name was the law. 3 more sessions will be requested, she said finally. The registry committee will invoke the exemption clause, the result will be challenged, and additional verification sessions will be demanded. It's the standard delaying protocol for a contested result. I'm on shift, I said. She looked at me. I'll still be on shift, I said. If they request additional sessions, I'll run them. She looked at me for a long moment, then she said quietly, "Why?" It was a simple question. She was not asking it dramatically. She was asking it the way she asked everything, directly, without performance, wanting the actual answer. "Because it's the job," I said. "Read what's true, record it accurately, that's it, that's the whole thing." She was quiet. "You could have voided it on day one," I said, "before it was even logged. You had every legal standing to do it. You still do. Nobody would have called it wrong, not by the law." "No," she said. "So you understand why I won't call it wrong either." Something in her face changed, not dramatically, not into tears or declarations, but the deep way a face changes when a person has recognized something. The way a held breath releases. The way a person stops bracing for the thing they've been certain is coming. "Yes," she said, "I understand." The additional sessions were requested. I ran them. Session 4, day 694.5%, logged. Session 5, day 7, 94.9%, logged. Between Session 3 and Session 5, the political atmosphere around the outpost changed in ways that were invisible on paper and very visible in practice. Kareth's staff stopped acknowledging me in the corridors. The two Rithwick staffers who had watched Session 3 did not return for Sessions 4 and 5, replaced by a single official observer from the Galactic Health Accord's coordinating body. A young Drelathi woman who took notes and said nothing, and whose presence, I thought, was probably meant to be reassuring to all parties by being reassuring to none. The summit's other delegations, the Sulvan, the Rithathi, a Cordon contingent that had arrived on day 3, ate their meals in the commissary with the careful, studied normality of people who have noticed a political fire in the adjacent building and are choosing not to look at it directly. The second formal communication arrived from the Secretariat. Commander Rithwick called me back into his office. This time he didn't ask if the equipment had malfunctioned. He asked if I understood the nature of the situation I was in. I told him I did. He looked at me for a longer time and then said, carefully, "Dast, you're a good medic and I don't want to see your career complicated by something that isn't your fight." I told him I appreciated that. He asked if there was anything he could do. I said I didn't think so. He said, "All right," and let me go. Rithwick was a decent man. He had been running this outpost for 9 years and he ran it well, which in practice meant he ran it honestly, and honesty out here was not nothing. I thought about telling him that his question, "Is this your fight?" was the wrong question, that the question was whether the result was accurate and what an accurate result required of the person who'd read it. But I didn't say it, because he already knew the answer and was asking me something else, asking if I was all right, which was considerate of him. I was all right. Kareth requested a second private meeting. I declined it. The 2 additional sessions ran and were logged. The summary was updated. The Galactic Health Accord's coordinating body acknowledged receipt of the full 5-session record. The result, 5 sessions, average 94.72%, no procedural irregularity, was as solid as it was ever going to be. On day 7 evening, after Session 5 was logged, I was sitting in Bay 1 writing the session summary when the door opened and she came in. Not for a scan. The compliance window had closed. There was no scheduled session. It was 5:40, the seam between my late shift and the early shift, and the station was at its quietest. She was wearing a simpler traveling robe than usual, the charcoal and champagne gold again, but without the formal overlay that she had worn for the official sessions. Her hair was down. It was longer than I had realized. The loose strands I had noticed at 2:17 on the first night were part of something that fell nearly to her shoulders when it was loose. Dark wine shot through with faint threads of copper near the ends. She looked, without the formal presentation, tired. Not collapsed tired. Not defeated tired. The quiet tired of a person who has been holding something very carefully for a long time and knows they have to keep holding it, but has allowed themselves, briefly, to sit down. You're early, I said, or late depending on how you count. I wanted to read the final summary before it was transmitted, she said. It went out at 300. I know, she paused. I wanted to read the copy you kept for station records. I pulled up the station record copy on the secondary terminal and turned the screen so she could see it. She read it carefully, all 5 sessions, all 5 results, the average, the summary notation, the procedural log. She read the way she did everything, thoroughly, without rushing. She was quiet for a while after she finished. The outpost was making its morning sounds around us, atmospheric processors cycling, the distant percussion of the early kitchen shift setting up in the commissary, a shuttle on approach on the far docking arm. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a place that did not particularly know it was at the edge of something. The committee will convene in 30 days, she said. The exemption clause will be invoked. The result will be formally entered in the registry and formally stricken in the same session. That's how it works. She paused. I want you to know that I knew this would happen before I told you to log the first result. I figured, I said. And you logged it anyway. It was true. She turned from the screen and looked at me. There was a quality of attention in her gaze I had noticed from the first night, that same thorough cataloging, that same sense of a person giving the whole of their focus to a single thing. In the first session, I had put it down to the general alertness of a person in an unfamiliar situation. Over 5 sessions, I had stopped explaining it away. It was simply how she looked at things she considered worth looking at. It will be stricken, she said again, not to hurt either of us with it, just stating the fact accurately, the way she always stated facts. I know, I said. The law is 400 years old, and it will not change in 30 days. I know that too. Then you understand that nothing about this situation resolves cleanly. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment. The pale silver gray of her eyes in the early morning light, cooler than in the bay's artificial overhead, the gray of dawn air coming through the clerestory window. What I would like, she said carefully, is to sign the station copy, not the transmitted record that's already filed. The station copy which is held here and which is a legitimate record of the compliance sessions at this outpost. She paused. The accord does not prohibit the patient from signing a local record copy as acknowledgement. It would be irregular but not unlawful. It would mean, she paused again, not searching for words, choosing them. It would mean that somewhere in a record that won't be stricken, there is a document that says this was real, that the number was true, that it was read correctly and recorded honestly, and that I acknowledged it. I looked at her. That seems like a reasonable request, I said. I pulled up the signature protocol on the local record interface and stepped back so she could access the terminal. She leaned forward and placed her hand on the biometric reader. The screen logged her identity, Vethori Imperial Principal, identification confirmed, and she signed the acknowledgement field. I signed it after her in the technician field, ODAS station staff. She straightened. She looked at the signed record on the screen. The same small shift at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile but in the same family. I'm going to ask you something, she said. All right. What is your honest assessment? Not politically, biologically and as a medic. If the exemption clause didn't exist, if the law were different, what would a result like this mean? I thought about how to answer it correctly. It would mean that 2 biological systems found each other unusually well suited, I said. It would mean the long-term interaction is cooperative rather than competitive, that the 2 systems would function better together over time than most cross-species pairs. It would mean the result is stable, consistent, and real. I paused. It would mean what you already know it means. She looked at me with those pale silver-gray eyes for a long time. I've been scanned 47 times, she said, in 22 years, across the full catalog of eligible Vethori candidates. No result above 62%. She paused. I've spent 22 years watching the protocol return the same answer and being told that the answer was simply taking time to resolve, that the match existed and the scan simply hadn't found it yet. Another pause. It took a human medic at a mid-rim outpost, running a routine compliance scan at 200 in the morning, for the machine to say anything different. "I know," I said quietly. "That seems relevant to me," she said. "I wanted you to know that I think it seems relevant." "It seems relevant to me too," I said. We were quiet for a moment. The Praxis 7 was off, the bay cool and still, the bay 3 light flickering in its familiar rhythm somewhere down the hall. I thought about what to say and found, as I often did in the moments that mattered, that the right thing was something simple and exact. Not large, not a declaration, just the thing that was true. "I don't know what comes next," I said. "I'm a medic at a mid-rim compliance post with 8 months left on his contract, and you're going back to Vethori Space in," I checked the station clock. 3 hours. I know what that means practically. I know what the committee will do." I paused. "But the station copy will exist after the committee does what it does. The record will exist, and I'll know what I read." She looked at me steadily. "And you think that matters?" "I think it's more than nothing," I said. "A result that's real doesn't stop being real because a law says it should be treated as if it isn't. It just becomes a real thing that a law has decided to ignore. Those are different things." She was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally, "they are." She picked up her traveling case from the counter where she had set it on the way in. At the door, she paused. "Oren," she said. First name, not medic, not dast, Oren. I looked at her. "My name is Caliph," she said. "Not the empress, not the principal, not the title, the name." I had read it in the public record. I had been entering it into compliance forms for 5 days. But the way she said it, directly, without ceremony, as a thing she was choosing to give rather than a thing I already had, was different from reading it. "Caliph," I said. She nodded, one small, deliberate nod as if something had been confirmed. Then she left. I stood in the empty bay for a while, in the quiet of the station at 600, with the signed record on the screen and the Bay 3 light doing its thing, and the Praxis 7 powered down and done. I thought about the result. I thought about 5 sessions and 5 consistent numbers and a law that was 400 years old. I thought about the way she had said log the result at 3:41 on a night when the easier path was directly in front of her, and she had chosen the harder one instead, and about the way she had come back this morning not for another scan, but to sign a record that the Empire would never look at. I thought about the things that are true even when they can't be acted on, the things you read correctly and record accurately and hold onto even when the official record won't keep them. I had known, since the 3rd run, that nothing about this situation resolved cleanly. She had told me so herself this morning, in case I had missed it. I hadn't missed it. What I knew was what I had always known. The job was to read what was true and record it accurately. That was the whole thing. That was the only thing I had ever been able to do with any consistency, in 9 years of medicine and 4 years of postings, and one night at 2:17, when a machine said something neither of us had a framework for. I had done the job. She had let me. I saved the signed station copy to the secure local archive, flagged it for permanent retention per medical records protocol, and logged the end of my shift. Outside, the station was waking up, the early shift coming on, the commissary starting its morning sequence, the atmospheric processors cycling to daytime settings. Somewhere in Docking Bay 4, I knew, the Vethori delegation was preparing to depart. I knew because the transit schedule was posted on the shift board, and because I had looked at it more than once in the preceding week in a way that was not entirely administrative. I went to the commissary and got coffee, which was terrible, and stood at the window that overlooked the docking level. I watched the delegation move through the lower corridor, 11 officials and a security complement, and an attaché who carried himself like a man who had lost a procedural argument and was deciding what to do about it. Last in the group, unhurried, was a woman in a charcoal robe with champagne gold lining, carrying a small traveling case and 3 patient data chips in her coat pocket. And somewhere in that same pocket, I suspected, the acknowledged copy of the station record, because I had printed it when I printed mine, and she had folded it without a word and put it away. She walked with that stillness that was not the stillness of someone at rest, but the stillness of someone who takes up exactly as much space as they intend to. Not the stillness of resignation. Something older than that and more deliberate. She did not look up at the commissary window. But she paused once in the corridor, and her head tilted at a very slight angle, the way a person tilts their head when they're aware of something without looking directly at it. The way a person acknowledges without demonstrating that they know they're being watched. The way someone says, in no language, I know you're there. Then she continued walking, and the corridor bent around the docking arm junction, and she was gone. I stood at the window for a while after the corridor emptied, holding the coffee cup. The docking level was doing its ordinary morning things. A cargo handler moving equipment across the near bay, 2 technicians in the transit corridor running a routine diagnostic on the lock seals, the slow, methodical business of a station waking up to another day. 30 days until the committee. 30 days until the exemption clause. 30 days until the Imperial Registry struck the result from its official record, closed the case, filed it under the long history of things the law had decided to treat as if they weren't true. Somewhere in the secure archive of Outpost Sarath Biware Station, in a local record copy that the Imperial Registry had no jurisdiction over, a compliance scan summary carried 2 signatures. A Vethori Imperial principal and a human medic on late shift, both certifying that the result was accurate, both confirming that it had been read correctly, both acknowledging that what the machine had found was real. I drank the terrible coffee. I thought in 30 days it will be stricken. I thought in 30 days the station copy will still exist. I thought about a pale silver-gray gaze at 341, the way it had held when I said I won't do that, and the thing it had registered that I was still trying to name, something between calculation and surprise and a kind of tired, measured recognition, the recognition of a person who has been asking a question for 22 years and has finally, in the most inconvenient circumstances imaginable, received an answer. She had come back this morning. Not for the scan, not for the official record. She had come back because she wanted to be somewhere that the number was true, with someone who had read it without flinching, and she had wanted to sign her name to that before she left. That was what it meant. I had understood it at the time, and I understood it now, standing at the commissary window with cold coffee and a late-shift fog settling behind my eyes, watching a woman carry 3 data chips through a docking corridor as carefully as she carried everything else. In 30 days, the committee would meet. 12 noble houses and a centuries-old clause and the full procedural machinery of the Vethori imperial system. And the result would be stricken, the way a correct answer gets stricken when the law has decided the question shouldn't have been asked. I wasn't bitter about it. Bitterness was for people who had expected something different. I had known what the committee would do since the night I read the 3rd confirmation. She had known before I did. What I was something harder to name. Not resignation, not hope exactly. Something in the register of people who have done a thing correctly in a situation that wasn't going to reward them for it, and have made their peace with that and are still glad they did it. I did not know what came next. I knew the shape of the next 30 days, the committee, the clause, the striking. I knew the shape of my next 8 months, the station, the shifts, the maintenance requests that would go unanswered. I knew that the distance between a mid-rim compliance post and the Vethori seat was not a small thing, and that a law 400 years old was not moved by a single scan result, however consistent, however accurate. I knew all of that. I knew what I had done, which was the only part that had ever been mine to do. Read what was true. Write it down. Keep it. It wasn't nothing. In the end, considering everything, considering the law and the committee and the 30 days and the 400-year-old clause and the 11 noble houses and the empire and the distance and all the ordinary insurmountable things, it was not nothing at all. Her name was Caliph. I had read it correctly. That was where it started.